1, 2, 1, 2. Yes, we're working. Welcome to the podcast stage. I'm going to kneel down. You're very professional. Thank you. Yeah, I prefer this. This is much better. Welcome to the podcast stage, Celebration Anaheim 2022. These guys are our first podcast and going to entertain us for an hour or less, but no more, of course. And we are up and running in, I think we should just go for it now. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, we're ready. Let's do it.
Well, there you go. I'm going to leave you to it. Good luck. Enjoy the show and make as much noise as possible because even though you're here in the room, it's a podcast. So make loads of noise. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Okay, is everybody ready here? All right. No, we're not going to sing the music. All right, in 3, 2, 1.
You're listening to the Cantina Cast. Your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Avar Kriss, and we are coming to you live from the podcast stage here in Anaheim, California, where tonight we're going to be bringing you Fallen Stars, the Jedi of the High Republic. We're going to take a look at some of the missteps the Jedi may have taken or could be taking very soon, coming off the end of Phase 1 and leading into what could be the fall of the Jedi. But before we do, I'd like to welcome our host here on the stage. First to my left is no stranger to the Cantina Cast. He is my Han to my Chewie, my BB to my 8, my Tarek to my Serret.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah, thank you. Chris Jonesy. Jonesy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. And I like how you're chewy because you're very furry. So.
I am quite furry, actually. Yeah. And next up, I'd like to welcome our podcast host here as well. So if you are a fan of Star Wars novels, you are probably no stranger to these guys. First, I'd like to introduce a woman who is very busy this week with 2 more panels to go, by the way. And I call her the godmother of podcasting. Not the godfather, but the godmother of podcasting. Please welcome to this show from Tarkin's Top Shelf, Becca Benjamin. And with her, every week, is a gentleman at the far end of here. He is a Star Wars literary maestro and someone who only checks his Twitter if you tag him in it. Please welcome Mark Suter. Mark, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm just riding Becca's coattails on this one. So.
And finally, I think I speak for everyone here in saying that it is an honor and a privilege to welcome our special guest host today. She's a New York Times bestseller, the author of many of our favorite Star Wars novels, including the most recent tragedy, The Fallen Star. I'm, of course, speaking none other than the Princess of Alderaan. Please welcome Miss Claudia Gray. Okay, so before we get started, Jonesy, can you please just kind of give us a state of the Republic, if you will, and kind of bring us up to date on where we are with the Jedi at the end of Phase 1? Because it does feel like the cracks are starting to show in many ways, yeah?
So Albert told me to be brief, so things are not going well.
Okay.
All right. Right. So when we introduced the Jedi and Charles Soule's Light of the Jedi, it's the heyday of everything that's going on in the Republic, right? But as we start to get through, especially after Valo, we see the cracks with Elzar Mann, and we start to see Stellan, the pressures building, especially as Avar, in his words, abandons her post. And of course, if you're finding any of the comics interesting, which I highly recommend, of course, Kevin Scott has gone through and shown us the challenge that Avar is going through, especially as she has started to really become obsessed with finding Lorna D. And so each one of them is being challenged in their own way. So each one of us today are going to talk a little bit about each of those main characters, where they're at, where they're going, and what some of those challenges that they're facing, and maybe where they're going to be. And then we'll, of course, invite our illustrious guests here to give us a little bit of insight maybe into some of those moments and maybe where they might be going. And who knows, maybe a surprise or two on the way.
Illustrious guests?
Mysterious guest?
Illustrious. We have an illustrious guest.
Okay. I was starting to have delusions of grandeur over here.
Yeah.
All right. So, Becca, I'm going to go to you first. And if you guys know anything about Becca, you know that she is a huge Anakin Skywalker fan.
Lover of sand, basically.
Has a special place in her heart. Always will have a special place in her heart. But there is someone during the High Republic era whose journey so far seems to mirror in a lot of ways Anakin Skywalker, and I'm speaking of none other than Elzar Mann. Can you walk us through some of those similarities and just how much of Anakin's journey is a cautionary tale for the Jedi like Elzar Mann during this era?
Cautionary is the right word, because when I started tweeting stuff like this, I got a lot of hate inbox mail. So please, everybody, just be kind. So Elzar in relation to Anakin. These comparisons will all lead up to a question for Claudia, which she answers very well most of my questions. So I'm looking forward to this.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. None at all. So Elzar Mann. Let's start at Light of the Jedi, our very first kickoff with this entire series. And at the end, he has a vision. And it's vague, but not so vague. He sees almost like the demise of his Jedi friends and colleagues, and it brings him to his knees, literally. This really brought me back to the Clone Wars, the Mortis arc, and when the brother shows Anakin what his future is. And that literally brings him to his knees as well. Lucky for Anakin, the father erased that memory, so he has no recollection of what went down in Mortis at all. But unfortunately, Elzar has to deal with that. It's something that haunts him. It's something that's, again, with the whole emotional drive that he has, he tries to almost lock everything out, including the Force. And it's something that he just has to deal with. Which brings me to, I'm going to skip around here, Orla Jareni in The Fallen Star, the Wayseeker, of course, which I love. She, in a way, reminds me a lot of Ahsoka's relationship with Anakin. She understands Elzar's emotional outbursts and his attachments, and she tries her best to calm that, literally, by allowing the feelings to come through him, but to let them pass, like the ebb and flow of the Force that we hear Luke Skywalker talk about in The Last Jedi, the ebb and flow. But she does that really symbolically with the water and the waves, him really doing a headstand in the water and letting the waves crash by, but letting him, hold it in for a minute, take it in, but then let it pass. It's kind of trying to teach him how to do the same thing with his conflict, with his emotions. And whether that happens or not, we have yet to see that. That leads up to a point where basically we get in The Fallen Star. Elzar is really doing his best to heed that training by Orla, and unfortunately has a misstep or a misswipe. And that is when he, and I'm just going to come out and say it, he murders Chancey Yarrow.
Spoilers.
Sorry,
Yeah,
that book's been out for a
Spoiler
while.
alert for everything.
It's not a spoiler anymore. And this to me is very similar to Anakin and Dooku. Dooku is an unarmed prisoner, and he still decapitates Dooku's head.
Bifurcates.
Bifurcates?
Bifurcates.
Oh no, I like that. Yeah,
What a good word.
Yes, I'm gonna write that
Very, very popular during the
Hang
French
on.
Revolution. So,
down. Let me write Dooku off, forget that. Okay, I love that. So here we are, again, a very similar situation. And again, though, the only thing is with that is that, there's witnesses with that. Unfortunately, that witness, again, spoilers, is no longer around to tell the tale. So that is up to, Elzar to share that, and what type of response he's going to get, I don't know. Just like with Anakin, Obi-Wan just happened to be unconscious at the moment, so he didn't see what happened. So there is no one else other than Palpatine to share that. So my thoughts are with this is that there are so many comparisons within these two. And of course, they're happening so many years apart, over 200. That being said, with everything we've gotten so far with Elzar, Claudia, do you think it's safe to say that Anakin was some sort of a template when it came to figuring out some sort of conflicted Jedi of this era?
Honestly, I feel like even though they are struggling with the same fundamental issue, the darkness versus the light, I think the problems that each of them are dealing with come from very different places. With Anakin, Anakin didn't have the experience that most of the Jedi have growing up in the creche and having the system, he had a family structure, and that was taken away from him. And, I always say, like, Obi-Wan did not get to be a Jedi Knight for a day before he was a master. That's supposed to be a thing that happens over time. And so you have somebody who literally cannot understand what the loss of a parental framework means. Obi-Wan hasn't ever had that, and he hasn't been out in the world on his own enough to sort of gain that knowledge otherwise. Whereas Elzar, I do think it matters. Elzar does have this terrible thing that happens in the Fallen Star, but Dooku was beaten, was defenseless, it was over. Elzar does believe that Chancellor is doing harm at that moment. Now, the correct thing to do is to take a minute,
Right?
say something. He would have realized, like, this person is actually trying to save us all, and I'm going to make that impossible. So he does flare, but the place that comes from, actually it kind of goes back to one of the things that I wrote about in Bloodline with Princess Leia. One of the big moments she has at the end is realizing that her father's journey to darkness could begin in a good place. For Anakin, it was very fear-based, but it was fear about somebody that he loved, and it was loss that had been made to suffer. And in this case, what he does here, what Elzar does here, it's coming from a protective place, but he lets the rage come into it. He can't do that in a pure way because, I'm sorry, I'm running out of words here.
No, that's fine.
He would have to have that moment. You just need to take that moment, and he doesn't. I do think, like, obviously there are similarities, but Anakin's backstory is so unique. Whereas, I hope Elzar is very individual, and we have loved writing his story. But I think this is probably something that Jedi deal with from time to time. I think, especially in this era, which is much less hierarchical, it's much less regimented. You are freer to find your own path, and Elzar has wandered onto maybe a bad path. So I do think they're very different. There's similarities, but
Okay. That's fair.
Was there any kind of influence from the Leveler's presence on the station for Elzar to make those decisions, or was it purely internal?
It was more internal. But, in the book, Elzar he's not trusting himself to be fully open to the Force in quite the same way because of what happened in the Rising Storm. And ironically, this winds up helping him because when you have the Leveler essentially, attacking through the Force, he actually is one of the few who's able to function throughout it at the level of efficiency and the level of clarity that is needed. It really only falls apart there at the end.
And I often find myself with going back to his training to chill a bit with waves hitting his face. I find myself in water scenes in movies and now in books, thanks to this, holding my breath unintentionally.
This is true.
This is a phenomenon that started with Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, when Captain Kirk has to swim to help the whales get out. And I found myself trying to hold my breath for the entire scene. It was impossible. So
I do that too. Never go see Dunkirk. Oh my God.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you're going to black out.
I hear you. Yeah. Now, the question I have really is, how can you write such a scene if you have that reflex? Because it takes longer to write than read, believe it or not.
Oh, well, I don't have to hold the breath the whole time I write. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. So I was able to do that. But yeah, anytime I see film of somebody underwater, I hate it because if it goes on for any amount of time, I'm just like, no.
Anxiety starts to go.
And I'm glad you guys like
waves have that additional anxiety of like, they could drag you under.
Yeah. I'm glad you guys liked that because that was the thing that I thought was very important, that his flexibility with the Force is a good thing if he keeps himself centered. And that's what Orla is steering him toward.
It's the 3 C's. Change, choice, and cost. I say that all the time with Star Wars. So
Okay, so I'm a child of the 80s, 70s technically, but I have a very trivial question about that scene because when I was reading it, the first thing that came to me was the whole Master Miyagi and Daniel's son, Karate Kid Can you just? Was there any influence there?
Not.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question.
I mean,
Next question.
no, I
I'm
love
kidding,
the
I'm
Karate Kid though. I think it's great. But Daniel San's standing up.
Yeah, of course. He's in the water. So.
Yeah, I mean, and also given where Daniel is at that point in the movie, Miyagi's probably like, if I tell this guy to stand on his head, he's going to drown. He's not ready for that.
All right, I'm going to take the loss on that one. Okay, so thank you, Becca. And so, Mark, we're going to shift our attention over to the pole star of the fire brand, the late Stellan Gios. So for me personally, I think the loss of his life was so tragic and so emotional because as much as we, the reader, were starting to get to know who he was, so was the galaxy, right? Because he was up front and center at the end of Rising Storm. But I think the worst part about his tragedy was the fact that he himself was just starting to realize who he was, having that autonomy, that, the agency to kind of do what he wants and not have the Jedi Council dictate or that, or how he was brought up. But I guess give us your thoughts on Stellan's journey and looking ahead. What does his death mean for the Jedi at large during this time? And are there lessons here? Is this a wake-up call for the Jedi at that time? Is there anything that they can learn from his journey and ultimately how he ended? Yeah, well,
Stellan is such an interesting character because he is always like one step away from the central figure. He's always in the shot. You'll sometimes see the same people over and over in historical photographs. It's like, oh yes, that's John Lewis by Martin Luther King Jr. Once you know who they are, you start to see them in more places. And he is kind of that person in the galaxy because he's on the council. He trained the youngest Jedi Knight in that generation. Yeah. And he was kind of in charge of making sure that the Chancellor was, getting from A to B on Valo when everything went south at the fair with the Nile attack. And so he became unintentionally a public figure, much like the Secret Service agent who jumped on the back of the Kennedy's limo. And so like that scene, that image is burned into the minds of everybody. So he unintentionally becomes sort of a hero and the public face. And it's not something that he ever wanted. It's not something he asked for. And he needed to take a minute. In fact, they've all needed to take a minute since the Great Hyperspace Disaster. And none of them have had a minute because the Nile have just been going nonstop. You've got the Drangir as well. And they're just constantly facing new challenges, apprentices, flirting with the dark side, all these things happening. And then, Avar Kriss, the shining beacon that kind of unites them all, she, in his mind, has abandoned her post on Starlight Beacon, and he becomes the de facto marshal. And he's resentful of that. Yeah. He's also kind of resentful of the attention that he's getting because he is famous. And, Orla Jareni, I think, is probably the most tragic loss in this book because she really helped Elzar Mann find his center again. And she was challenging Stellan. Yeah. And helping him find that place that he needed to be. And so ultimately, his end is tragic, but not completely tragic because his self-sacrifice ends up saving an entire city and planet of people. And I'm reminded here of, and sorry about this, but I'm reminded of Star Trek II when Spock sacrifices himself for, the thing that pops into my mind always is what he says is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. And he is the one in this sequence. And he says to Elzar, you need to get out. I will take care of this. And he himself steers the station so that it doesn't hit the city. And ultimately, the project that let's see, what was the planet called? Imran. They had just finished rebuilding their entire water system. Yeah. And it got a little bit damaged because of the waves, but they were able to fix it because of his actions. And I guess when you're writing a character, Claudia, like this, what characters or real people were touchstones for them? Because, you can see that in historical figures and fictional figures all throughout.
Yeah. This isn't exactly the template. It's a different thing. But actually, some of this goes back to I think it was in the 70s, but it was this famous business book called The Peter Principle. Does anybody know this?
No.
Unfortunately, it is now obscure, which it shouldn't be, but its argument was people in businesses get promoted to the point of incompetence. They get pushed out of the jobs they're really good at until they get a job that they're not as good at, and that's where they stick. And it was sort of making the argument, you should incentivize people to be where they are doing great work, not where they're doing this. And that's not exactly what is going on with Elzar. He is that great. He is that talented. But by being put in this position where he has to symbolize so much and he has to take the place of Avar, he is running the risk of kind of losing that grip. I mean, what we start to see a little bit in Fallen Star is he's acting a little bit more like a prequels Jedi, where they've gotten too much into, this is the rule, we follow the rule.
Dogmatic.
Yeah, he's starting to go down that path. And that's not fundamentally who he is. That role, that thing, like by holding him up and going, look how magnificent he is, how does anybody not become self-conscious? How does anybody not second guess themselves? I mean, the other way, of course, is to let it go to your head and become really obnoxious. But of course, Stellan does not do this. So it was about, you know what it really did call from, the fictional thing I called from. Did anybody else in school read the short story, The Price of the Head?
Mm-mm.
It was a little questionable in terms of
The content.
Yes, it was. Because it was, a guy. It was written way long ago, but he is. He's an alcoholic. He's really angry. He served on the ship, whatever. And then this native guy who worked on the ship, he wakes up, and the guy's like rolling away with him in a boat. And first, like, what the hell? But over the course of like the next couple of weeks, the guy dries out. The guy's able to think a little bit about his life. He begins to really appreciate the beauty of all of this. And then he's taken to this place and he realizes he's going to be killed. It's going to be a ritual sacrifice. That's what he's been brought to.
Oh my.
And the last words are, shoot, it's cheap at the price, because he got himself back.
Yeah.
And while, a lot of the sort of othering in that story is now really dated, it was really struck me as a child, the fact that this guy, by really being able to re-embrace his life, could face death much more easily. And that was where I wanted to get Stellan in this. In a lot of ways, he is happier and more at ease in that last sequence where he knows he's going down than he is at any other part.
Oh yeah,
of the
there's
story.
an inner peace that you can just feel lifted off the pages during that moment.
He knows that he is the person that he means to be, that he wants to be, that he is fulfilling who he wants to be as a Jedi, absolutely as never before.
Yeah.
So he gets himself back.
So this wasn't a golden books, right? This wasn't one of the little.
Yeah, all those
No,
golden
no.
books about people's heads getting
Yeah,
cut off.
heads getting cut off, yeah.
Kids of the 80s.
So one of the things I'm glad Mark brought up was Orla Jireni, because I think this is one of the aspects of the story where I was just wanting I want to know the backstory with Orla and Stellan, and it's just we're beating around the bush so much, and they almost have the conversation, and then we don't get the conversation. And are we ever going to get that story?
In all honesty, I don't know. I do think eventually there are going to be some spin-off stories from the High Republic that aren't straightforward. I don't know that. This is not like me going, oh, here's the plan. But that's just my belief, is that we're going to see that. And I think it would be great to get into it. And I admit that was a little bit mischievous of me, I guess, to put that in there. But I kind of love that because to draw, that moment, I think it's in the Two Towers in the movie where they're slow motion and they're on the horses and they're coming in. And in the background, partly obscured, you see Legolas just swing up through the air and land on that horse. And that special effect is like 90 times better because you don't see it all, because it's just a little bit thrown away. I think sometimes there's room in the narrative for that, where you add some of that layer, but you don't actually have to take the entire narrative there. It's more about building the complexity of the relationship between Orla and Stellan.
Do you ever have to explore a little bit, at least in your mind, or a note that says, okay, this is generally where they're coming from? Or is it really you're able to operate?
I kind of have a visual image in my head of a couple of things, but I've sort of been careful not to contextualize it too much, because if we do ever get to go back there, which I think would be great, I want to leave it open to play with, but, I have a sense of it. And also, like, especially where Stellan was at that point in time, Orla was the exact person. Just
that counterpoint, to everything.
Yeah.
I think that the key to really good drama, and this applies to any storytelling, is conversations that are never had.
Mm-hmm.
Because how often do people say, this is so unrealistic? If they had just talked about it, this could have been avoided. And it's like, how many times have you put off a conversation with a person until it was too late? And it caused all kinds of problems. So
yeah, I actually remember years ago when the TV show Lost was on the air. Somebody was like, why don't, and they actually, I think it was TV Guide, which is a real magazine that used to exist.
Yes.
But in TV Guide, they actually got like a psychologist who specialized in communication. Like, what is going on when these people don't talk to each other? He's like, actually, they're doing much better than most people in their life.
Right, yeah.
Most people are terrible at it.
yeah, well, I think there was some frustration in The Rise of Skywalker that Finn never actually said, I'm feeling the Force, but it's like, it's really implied. And there's some tension in the back and forth there.
I still wanted it.
Yeah, I still want it. Well, I'm hoping that we get future projects featuring Finn the Jedi, just saying.
I would love that.
Yeah. But then, just in so many of our favorite TV shows, the thing that keeps us coming back is this, like, but if they had just talked, and it applies to Star Wars as well with Anakin and Obi-Wan. If you've read Brotherhood, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that in Brotherhood. So,
all right. Well, Becca's chomping at the bit here. There she goes.
yes, go ahead.
The more I listened to the back and forth of everything everyone's saying, I was thinking of Star Wars, but I was thinking of, because I just recently replayed them all, season 7 of the Clone Wars, where Obi-Wan really wants Ahsoka to talk to Anakin. And, everything starts happening all at once. And she's like, well, I'll talk to him when I get back.
Yeah, right.
And that never
happens. Yep.
Had that conversation happened, how would things have played out? Again, it's that the change is happening, you make a choice, then you pay the cost. This happens in Star Wars over and over again. It's something I always said. And that's one thing, it makes you have these debates with, but what if? I love the what if factor in these. They really come into play, which is what you were just talking about with Stellan and Orla. That whole, if they would have took 2 minutes, what would have changed? Would he still be where he's supposed to be, or would he be gone?
Yeah.
So it's just something to think about.
Same with like Comac too, right? With that whole aspect.
My heart is shattered.
Oh, I know. Absolutely love Midnight Horizon. If everyone listens to the show, you know how in love I am with Midnight Horizon.
It's amazing.
I've heard that people write entire books based on throwaway lines in movies, and they turn out really well.
You don't say.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's kind of round out the top 3, the firebrand here. And we're, of course, talking about, so Jonesy, I'm going to go to you for
your girlfriend.
My girlfriend. So she can do no wrong, first off. She is the hero of Hetzal, Avar Kriss. And while she may have brushed up against the dark side to some extent with Elzar Mann, she still remains, in my eyes, the light of the Jedi. And I hope that we get to see that here going into phase 3, because I don't know that we'll see her in phase 2, but we'll ask Claudia about that a little bit later. But she's had a very rocky year, given her position and what she was forced into. But maybe talk us through some of the missteps that Avar Kriss has taken, because she does seem to have a bit of a white whale complexity, right? Where she's just obsessed with, cutting the head off of the snake. It's we were talking about this last night about this is the proverbial Clone Wars. If we just take Dooku out, right, the Clone Wars will be over. If we just, or Grievous, right, one of those guys, and it does lead her down a dark path. And thankfully, she stopped just short of doing something too terrible.
Did she?
But did she? But yeah, so tell us, what are your thoughts on Avar Kriss?
Well, first of all, are you returning her calls yet?
No, she's not talking to me anymore.
Okay, because that's really important to me. Yeah, so Avar Kriss, again, when she started off, she is the epitome of the Jedi Order, right? She has this interpretation of a song, and everyone around her is better because of her. And so to have any kind of change in that character really is a stark contrast to, I think, really any character that we've seen so far in the High Republic as far as the Jedi are concerned. And what we have, though, is with Lorna D, thinking that Lorna is the Eye of the Nile. She just, like you said, white whale, she's obsessed that if she can just get Lorna, everything will end. Everything will be fine, and we'll be able to get there. Unfortunately, she starts to take this, that line, she doesn't have it either. She thinks she does, but then she keeps struggling to actually meet the line that she's, Elzar has crossed it a couple of times now, but Avar's a little bit better at it. But the problem is that she starts to turn everybody away as well. She starts to shield out Skier, and she starts to steer Keeve in particular.
Yeah.
And Keeve is one of these people that Keeve looks up to her. She is an idol to many in the Jedi, especially these newly knighted Jedi. It is really important for her to.
And she knighted them herself, too.
Yeah, herself.
right.
She lopped off the braids and everything. So that she is starting to really execute Nihil in Kevin Scott's in the Jedi's End arc of the High Republic comic book is a really stark contrast to the Avar that we knew at the very beginning. And you said that she stopped short, but unfortunately, Avar really didn't stop short. She really crossed the line as well when she struck down. I mean, she took the swing at Lorna Dee.
Right.
And if it wasn't for Keeve having that pure heart wanting to save Avar and to block that strike, Avar would have been right in the same boat as Elzar. And so what I think is really interesting, and I know we were talking a little bit before that Claudia's not written Avar specifically, at least in any depth. Right, yeah. But I think one of the things that's interesting is as Kevin Scott was going through and building that arc for her, and as at the very end of Fallen Star, as Becca showed us how Elzar comes out of it, they find each other. And I think whenever you get that, you see Elzar's story in Fallen Star, but then you also put together what Avar went through in the comics. They come together. You start to either A, they really need each other, or B, you're really frightened about what they might be together. Because now you've got two people who have always flirted with it, a little bit. When they were younger, they had a little fling maybe. But as you worked through that process, Claudia, did you have any idea where Kevin Scott was going with the character and what that scene might mean when you wrote it?
Oh yeah, I mean we talked this through the same way we sort of talked through coordinating all of this, and that was especially difficult in this since we were literally telling, stories set in different parts of the same station. Yeah. So it required some choreography, and obviously the big beat for Avar happens in the comic. But the coming together of Elzar and Avar in that moment, in some ways, I think Stellan's death and their shared grief for that is the thing that allows them to come together and have it be a good thing, and not, what would be the word? Very reckless. People have gotten to a reckless place, going somewhere reckless together, but instead.
So together they might be able to refine the path, I guess, of sorts, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Stellan. There's the bit in there where they say, he said, yeah, we were a constellation of 3 stars, but 2 of them were much closer. Speaking of Elzar and Avar, and Elzar says, but you were our whole star. You were the one that we followed. And the example. And when Stellan fulfills that in the ultimate way that he can fulfill it, I think it brings Elzar and Avar back to a good place and ties them more tightly together than it had before. And obviously, neither of their paths is completely resolved. A lot is still going to happen. But I think the reunion has a completely different character because of what Stellan did.
So we think as we go into a phase 3, which presumably we will come back to these characters, we maybe find them approaching the better path, or getting things back in line and organizing a little bit better from where they're at, I guess. Hopefully. Maybe.
Yeah, she can't say. But I will say,
that's a year from now.
In my notes, I had put the last few paragraphs from Fallen Star because I think it's appropriate for this.
Yeah.
So this is after they fixed the water system again. When a brief pause came in their labors, Elzar made his way to Avar's side. She gazed upward at the darkening sky, and as he reached for her, she stretched out one hand. He took it and looked up with her. Amid the emerging stars were tiny specks that he knew to be some of the ships that had swarmed here, hoping to help, but powerless in the face of destruction. It still matters that they came, he reminded himself. It will always matter. That unity, that compassion, that courage, this is what the Nile lack. We will not win by stooping to their level, but by rising so far above it that even the Nile cannot reach. Avar murmured. Stellan always saw the Force as the firmament, as brilliant and as expansive as all the stars of the galaxy. He told me that he saw the 3 of us as a constellation. Elzar's vision blurred with tears. He fiercely blinked away. An incomplete one now. No, he's still with us, as surely as the Force is with us. Stellan has become one with the Force, after all. Avar leaned her head against Elzar's shoulder, and when we think of him, we can always find him, as long as we look to the sky. Elzar held her close. Our pole star still shines. Getting a little choked up. It's good writing. Sorry.
Mark Suter, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I love that, and I include that in my notes because it just shows you how close they were. And I did love that you established that as a dynamic between the three of them, that he is sort of the one that they look up to, but they are kind of closer to each other. Mm-hmm. And I am curious, I'm not going to probe, where that goes from here.
Yeah, and I mean, I think also on the more human level, I think many of us have been in a situation where there's three friends and two of the friends are dating and everybody's friends together. But even if there's no jealousy involved, it's sometimes a little awkward.
It can be awkward.
Yeah, that energy can be there. And then you take these people who have these powers and these responsibilities who are caught up in these events, to have that dynamic operating within that. I felt like it both dealt with the symbolism of the Force and everything that we're reaching toward, but it also was something that was very human and real, because you want people to be able to relate to this, even though it's happening on so much more of an epic scale.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But once again, that situation just there that Mark just read from your own words there, from your novel, I am again reminded of the conversation that, failed. But in Attack of the Clones, happy 20-year anniversary, by the way, Anakin approaches Padme about the feelings, and she refuses to go there, that, their lives would be destroyed if they go down that road. And she really held her ground, much like Avar is holding her ground, and she's the moral compass and keeping Elzar in check. But if she falters and gives, where will that lead? That's a question I think Albert really, you wonder about.
Yeah.
These two get together and she loses her standing her ground, loses that moral compass, and she gives into Elzar and those feelings. What does that mean? Right. Where would that go? And, there could be a whole nother meaning behind the great disaster.
Yeah.
Think of it that way.
Well, and it is, I'd say it's a watershed moment, but it does feel like it could go one of two ways, right? They can harbor what happened, make something positive of that, but it could easily go south and, they start confiding in each other, leaning on one another. And that, emotionally, if the emotions start coming in, then if we go by Yoda's lessons, it could lead to dark side, right? At some point, right? That attachment could start to grow there. So all very interesting stuff.
I think one of the interesting parts about that one, though, is that we've always said that we're better together than apart, right? And I think we're seeing that here. But they've also got to be able to work independently. And while I think Avar has demonstrated her ability to do that, Elzar struggles with that, especially now, because Elzar is not. He relied on Orla, or he was trying to help Stellan, and Stellan kind of had to owe something to him, and now he's leaning a bit more on Avar. So they have to be able to have that self-confidence and that ability in themselves and that trust in themselves. And I think with Elzar still trusting the Force abilities, I think this is another really dynamic moment. And Avar's a great person to probably help smooth some of that. I'm trying to get him to that next place, but I think you really got to be able to operate independently and be interdependent rather than have a dependency problem. And I'm a little concerned about Elzar still having that, because he gravitates that direction so quickly sometimes and he can't stop himself.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Did you have a question?
No, I'm very interested in what you're going to say next.
Oh, well, thank you. I was going to ask Claudia a question. So I know some of the feedback, and not necessarily negative, but was the lack of Avar Kriss, like you mentioned. Her main beats were in the comic book, and I think for those of us that bought all the comics and read all the stories, we relished in a lot of that stuff. We really got to see great moments with Avar Kriss in that. So going into, I guess phase 3, can you at least let us? Is there an opportunity, or is it possible that she may show up in the main novels? Kind of shift, or should we expect her to kind of still be in the comic books?
I think that none of that is set in stone at this point.
Yeah.
We know where the story goes.
Sure.
Exactly which format is going to tell which facet of the story is a thing that we keep working out as we go along.
Yeah.
That's about as far as even I know
at
this point. I mean, I think it is a valid criticism. Both Cav and I had the sense like we had a half of a story.
Yeah.
And I've certainly, as a reader, I understand that. But that was the way that it had to go.
Sure,
And it was especially, I think, because the comic had to be written at a very different time than the novel. And so we really had to pace it out and work through it. And hopefully it flows. Hopefully it does.
I think it does.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
And if you haven't read the comics, they're really great. But also Marvel Unlimited now. It used to be issues as old as 6 months.
6 months now.
But now it's 3 months.
Yeah.
So you're only a couple issues behind if you sign up for Marvel Unlimited.
Well,
So
I think the last art trade paperback's coming out here pretty soon too.
yeah, trade paperbacks are a great way to
Get caught up on the
To
actual
consume
arcs.
those,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's fantastic.
All right, so Claudia, before we kind of wrap things up, and we've got some time here, so maybe we can just do a Q&A if anybody has any questions for Claudia here at the very end. But we're going to close the doors, and we're going to ask you if there's anything that you can tell us about Phase 2. It won't leave this room. Like, we've all sworn secrecy, right?
and we put you in the middle of the stage so that you could easily not escape.
Yeah,
You could leave the door open. Nothing doing. I'm sorry.
Well, but no, if you could, is there anything you can tell us about Phase 2? Anything that you can tease up? Or, I mean, I know we're going to get some information this week, but how do you...
It would be very different if we were having this conversation after the High Republic panel later today.
Yeah.
But we aren't. And I think the surest way to make sure that panel doesn't go well is to grab everything and then meet up with everybody else like, yeah, I spoiled it all.
But we can expect some big announcements. Would you say that, at least in
yes,
in
you're
the
going to
panel
learn
today?
a lot more this afternoon.
Awesome.
I think in, what, like 4 hours, 3 hours?
I think it's at what, 3?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's at 3.
3 hours. Okay. Well, good. We're all looking forward to that. We will be there as well. So we got some time. I know we've got some folks here today that have come out to see Claudia, talk about maybe the High Republic. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? There we go. Question right there.
Claudia, thank you so much for bringing us to High Republic as long as well everyone else. I was curious, is there storylines or different types of character arcs that work better in the books versus comic books? And do you guys try to figure out what goes into which one?
So if I could just, I'll repeat the question. So he asks, are there certain characters that work better in different medias, in different forms, whether it be comic books, novels, that kind of thing?
I don't know if it's characters, but there are certainly story elements that can work better. Obviously, if you're really trying to get very deep into somebody's thought process, that flows much more in a novel,
yeah.
than having a comic panel that's just nothing but text and a little bit of somebody's face over in the corner. Whereas if you have really powerful visual moments, we describe these as best as we can in the novels, but some of them are going to look so much more spectacular in the comic, particularly given the really great level of art.
Oh, Aria and Anandito, by the way, is just killing it.
So, yeah, I would say it's more about the story element than the character in terms of where that might be to its best advantage.
Is that one of the reasons then you feel like Avar Kriss's story was slotted for the comics? Because there would be, we had the Hutts going on there at one point, the Dren gear, there was some crazy visuals and all of that. And then especially at the very end when, they walk in and see, what's his name, holding the Starlight Beacon together. Stellan Gios, yeah. Some of that stuff visually was amazing to see. But, I think, to your point, there's only so much you can get into a novel and discuss without it really kind of being bogged down in the minutia and losing some people in that. But
yeah, and I always say it's always true for me, writing-wise, like writing an action scene takes longer than anything else because you're thinking through all this. And hopefully it reads well on the page and people enjoy it and it works. But there are certain elements that, one comics panel may make that much more vivid and much more engaging than even your very best narrative account of it. There's some things you want to see. And also Star Wars began cinematically, and it is very natural that most fans, even if they love the books, are going to relate to it cinematically.
right.
So as you write the comics in this next phase, how are you feeling about that transition between the two mediums then?
I'm actually really excited. I've done some graphic novels for DC in the past. And that was a learning process because, everybody tells you, and tell the story with images and not it, and this, but actually having your creative self believe it and actually begin to think in those terms, it takes a little bit, or it took me a little bit anyway. Now, once it happened, I find myself putting all these things like, oh, and this person can recognize, in a novel, it's like, wait, no, there's no pictures in this. Go back, take it back. But I'm very, very excited to do it.
Yep.
Is that more like writing a screenplay for comics, or is it its own animal
I've never really written a true screenplay, but yeah, I mean, with a screenplay, you get a little bit more play with dialogue. Dialogue can play a larger part because you do have, the performance illuminating that. But yeah, I mean, you're trying to look for the visual way of telling the story. Recently, I've been rewatching a bunch of old X-Files, and I've been really favorably impressed. I mean, that was an earlier generation of TV that was not always very focused on, creating the big image that we very much do have now. But the X-Files was very, very good at creating this mood and this atmosphere, and using a couple of images to just create new heights of the fear factor.
Yeah, season 4 and 5 are the best seasons, by the way, of X-Files. For anybody that's wanting to know,
Howard never has an opinion about this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we will have a long wrestling match about this later. We'll get that.
Oh, all right. Well, let's do that. Yeah, there we go. Claudia versus me. I'm gonna lose.
We have another question.
Yeah, do we have any more questions? Anything else you guys want to ask, Mark?
I've got a question. With writing horror book, or anything indeed, is it more fun laying it out or fleshing it out? Once you're into the thick of it, is that more enjoyable than setting the setting, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, so the question is what's more enjoyable, setting things up or actually fleshing out, teasing out all of the details of these stories and characters?
For me, it is the fleshing out. I think that answer is not necessarily the same for everybody. And certainly there are elements of setting things up that are fun, but for me, everything really does come down to how does this character feel about this?
Yeah.
And yes, you have the amazing visuals and the space politics and you have all of these things going on. But for me, I really want to know, okay, what does it feel like to be in this situation and have this happening? Yeah. And so, yeah, actually getting to dig in and say like, okay, yeah, Stellan's writing the space station down, but how does he feel about it? That's the most fun for me.
Yep.
And there was one in the back there too.
Sorry, I was a little bit late, so if you guys talked about this. I was just wondering how did you come up with Geode, and what was the reaction from the other writers when they're like, hey, this is going to be a long, weird bit going through the whole book. So.
Okay, Geode, yes. I came up with Leox first because I wanted a pilot who would be kind of scoundrelly, but not Han Solo.
Yeah, right.
And then I forget exactly what it was, but I saw something with Matthew McConaughey, and I was like, there we go. That's
all right.
Yeah, and especially not now sort of flirting with running for politics, McConaughey. 90s, got arrested playing the bongos naked. Still so dear to our hearts. I read his memoirs. It's pretty fantastic. So I was like, okay. And Leox loves to hear himself speak, and I love writing his dialogue. And then we have Affy there, and I knew we needed somebody else. And it'd be somebody else who didn't speak a lot. But again, this can't be Chewbacca. So I'm trying to think. And it was actually I was like, it could be a different kind of life form, this or that. And my husband was like, it could be a rock. Yeah. And I was like, wait a second. And I realized he's not a rock. It's just very difficult to tell a rock from a Vintian unless you are a Vintian or presumably a rock. In which case it's very clear.
Right.
And I was like, can I play with that? Can I do that? And the thing that finally made me realize, yes, I want to do this, was think of the line that said, it's a nickname because you can't pronounce his name unless you don't have a mouth. And I was like, okay, I can do this. And it's been super fun because the whole thing of Geode is about using the prose that we use, because there is so many sort of phrases and techniques that we use to show a character reaction without actually using any words.
And you do a masterful job at that.
And keep playing with that. And actually, I spoke to the translator in French who said that was so fun to do because the phrases and things are very different in French. Yeah. But she got to dig in and think about that. She's like, it was actually very creative, very fun. So that was the idea. And, and also it's just good to have the comic characters. You can't forget, Star Wars has always been funny as well as dramatic and mystical. Sure. And you have to have the fun in it. And that, I think, is what Geo brings to the table.
Well, the beautiful part of it is how you blend those moments in with the really heavy moments. And you still get that just brief moment of levity where you're like, I shouldn't laugh at this, but I'm going to laugh anyway.
Yeah. And to me, I wonder, like we were talking about this on one of our shows, is there are, in my opinion, there are only so many ways that you can say that a character says something without saying something. And you've used a lot of these already. And I'm starting to wonder, like, are you going to have to reuse these? Do you have still more in your back pocket that you're waiting to spring out?
Wonder as well. You just wait until you get to the scene and see.
I am concerned
you find out
that if he ever raises an eyebrow, he will break.
He will not be doing that at any time. He is without eyebrow. He is without that. But he's been a delight to write, and I'm glad that a lot of fans have enjoyed him.
Yeah, he is our rock, as we like to say.
A solid character.
Yeah.
Solid character. Here come the puns.
All these little Lego figurines of the High Republic, and they had a little gray geode.
Yeah.
It's like, this is so beautiful.
He's a character we would never take for granted. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be here all week. Let's see. Any other questions from anybody before we wrap things up here? Okay, well, let's do a quick giveaway. We mentioned so Tarkin's is giving away 2 books tonight for people that came in cosplay. So we've got 4 people here in the audience. We've given them each a number, and we need a random number here to pick from. Can you make some little cards that we can do? Or actually,
you just call a number out.
And it's only 1 through.
That's only 1 through 4. Okay, so I'll say, and I don't know who I give the pins to be honest. I'm going to say 2 and 4. So 2 and 4, come on up, and we will give you guys one of the signed copies of Into the Dark. Oh yeah, you guys can just come around here. And yeah, so we're going to wrap things up here. I think we'll end it there. Before we want to get out of here, though, we did want to say thank you to all of you guys for showing up. We understand you have a lot of choices here with us this weekend, and appreciate you being here early to kind of talk about the Fallen Star and the High Republic.
And actually, hey, if after the show, if people are comfortable, if you want to group together, we can take a photo. That would be amazing as well.
Yeah, come up to the stage here. That'd be great. So, so Becca and Mark, where can people find you guys on Tarkin's Top Shelf?
Should I do that?
Well, I can speak for myself. I'm at Mark E. Suter on Twitter. And I reiterate, if you tag me, I will see it because I have given up doom scrolling. So I probably won't see it unless my name is specifically tagged.
I won them.
Yeah.
I'm learning that. Yeah.
And then Becca, she can do the whole thing on the show. Yeah.
So if you want to get in contact with us, you can always email us at ttspodfeedback@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Tarkin's Top Shelf. If you want to say hi to me, best place is on Twitter. Yes, I know it's a cesspool of negativity, but I am there at URAngelB. So,
she's our beacon of hope, though.
That's right.
That she
I'm
is.
Our pulse.
But I'm not dating all women.
And for the Cantina Cast, I'll let Jonesy do our normal spiel. But if you guys are into the High Republic, we've done a lot of coverage. I think Fallen Star, I think we 14 hours of coverage. We broke down every character. So tons and tons of material there for you guys to kind of go back and listen to. But Jonesy, where can they find us on social media and elsewhere?
Yeah, CantinaCast.com. We have all of our events and all the shows if you want to go back and look through the backlog. We'd love to have you join our Discord channel as well, CantinaCast.com/Discord. We have a great chat. Of course, we've got the rest of the Early Media Network as well. Albert's on Twitter at Albert M. Padilla, and I'm at Galactic Swagger. And we'd love to have everybody join us online or in Discord.
Yep. And then finally, can we give everybody just give her a round of applause? So Ms. Claudia Gray, thank you so much for being here. And Claudia, where can people find you the rest of the weekend here?
The rest of the weekend, I have at least one signing a day, every day at the Mysterious Galaxy area. It's different times of day, but I think you can find it. And should I list the
full schedule is on your Twitter?
Oh yeah, you can find my Twitter, which I am not on at all. My beloved assistant Sarah does that for me, and oh, thank God. But she.
Applause for Sarah.
Yes.
Thank you, Sarah.
But yeah, that'll be up on my Twitter, and I did post my schedule to my Instagram. So if you check for me there, you'll be able to find me.
Sounds good. Well, that's going to do it for us here. I want to thank everybody once again for joining us for this show. Enjoy the rest of your time here at Star Wars Celebration, and may the Force be with you.
Always. Awesome.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.